Well, good morning. Good Shabbos, everyone. So a couple of weeks ago, we began a sermon series through the book of Matthew. And this week, as we just read, we are in Matthew chapter 2. And it began after Herod was born in Bethlehem, in the land of Yehuda. During the time when Herod was king, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. And they asked, "Where is the newborn king of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." Of course, most people are familiar with this passage as part of what is called the Christmas story. However, I want to look at it today as setting up the context for Matthew's account of Yeshua. Now, it tells us that he was born in Bethlehem, the house of bread, an ancient town associated with the Davidic line, which is approximately 5.5 miles from Jerusalem. It's interesting when you're standing on a high place in Jerusalem that you can see Bethlehem just right over the hill. It's crazy when you're there to actually see how close everything is. And this is part of Matthew setting up that Yeshua is a descendant of the line of David and therefore a candidate to be the Messiah. We've been talking about this the last 2 weeks, even to the point of the way that Matthew sets up the genealogy, right? With his 14 plus 14 plus 14, which equals the name David, right? In so many different ways, he's trying to emphasize that this Yeshua is a descendant of David. And it tells us that there were Magi who came to Herod at the time that Herod was king. Who was King Herod? First of all, it's important to keep in mind that Herod the Great, although he is Jewish by religion and, you could say by faith, he is an Idumean. Who are the Idumeans? Well, this is one of those examples in Jewish history where it is never a good idea to try to convert people by the sword. Because rarely do you get true believers, right? And Herod and his family are some of those people. Technically, they're Jewish, but their history of being Jewish was convert or die, right? And so they're not really that committed. In fact, Herod is a real monster. Like if you read about Herod, like he was just all over the place mentally. He had all these visions of making himself to be really great. And the one thing he did do, though, is he did massive building projects all over ancient Israel, even to the point where his decision to expand the temple, the second temple, was such a grandiose project it wasn't even done when it was destroyed. Most people don't know that. And now, the time that it was destroyed, in the year 70, it was one of the ancient wonders of the world. Like, it was grand. It was so big, so much bigger than it used to be. Remember, where did the temple used to sit? And where is today the Temple Mount in Jerusalem? Does anybody know? On Mount Moriah, what is the significance of Mount Moriah, traditionally? Right. And traditionally, that is the same place where they built the temple. And the Temple Mount is the highest place in Jerusalem. So no matter where you were in ancient Jerusalem, you would look up to to where the temple was. And the second temple, the Heichal, the center point of the Temple Mount, was made of white marble. And so the light in the temple would reflect off the light. And this is why it's called the light on top of a hill, right? This light that shines in the darkness. Because the menorah, remember, the menorah itself was, like a story high or 2 stories high. And so the light that emitted from that thing would light up the marble, and then it would glow literally in the dark. So King Herod, who has a line after him, and when we think king, he's a vassal king. Right? He's a king, but really he's a local king who answers to a higher authority. And by this point, he answers to Rome, right? Rome, and the Caesar in Rome is the leader of the Roman Empire. And so King Herod is just sort of a vassal king who controls Judea from Jerusalem. And we are told that Magi, who the heck are the Magi? Well, the Magi, this word Magi in English, comes from the Greek word magos, which is derived from the Old Persian magus. The Magi were most likely Zoroastrian astronomers. Zoroastrianism is one of the ancient religions in the Middle East that way predates, Islam or, even, it's not older than Judaism, but it's around that time. I mean, as far as like how far back it goes. And the Magi were mostly astronomers. As part of their religion, these priests paid particular attention to the stars and gained international reputation for astrology, which was at the time highly regarded as a science. And likely, we are never told exactly how many Magi came, but it was probably a whole group of them. Where we get the idea that there were three, right, the three kings of, is from the gifts that they bring, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But that just tells us the gifts. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's how many people there were. There was probably a group of them that came. And in verse 3, we continue. When King Herod heard of this, he became very agitated. And so did everyone else in Jerusalem. And he called together all the head Kohanim, the priests, and the Torah teachers of the people and asked them, where will the Messiah be born? Because he wants to know what is going on here, because these, foreign people came here looking for some kind of a king, and they're claiming this child or whatever it is the king of the Jews. So you tell me, what am I missing? And so they kind of search the scriptures, and midrashically they come up with an application from Micah chapter 5, verse 1. And they responded when he asked, where will the Messiah be born? The Kohanim and the Torah teachers, they say, in Bethlehem of Yehuda, they replied, because the prophet wrote, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Yehuda, are by no means the least among the rulers of Yehuda, for from you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. And so they read this as referring to the place that the Messiah is to be born. Now, who are the Kohanim? Like, these are the priests from the line of Levi, right? And they were mostly Sadducees. At the time of Yeshua, there are various religious groups, and only the elite, or at least a small majority of people, were actually a member of one of these parties. It seems that the majority of people they didn't really care whether you were a Pharisee or a Sadducee or whatever, but there were the people who were committed to these groups, and they were very committed, right? And most of the Kohanim were members of the Sadducees. You have the Pharisees, you have the Sadducees, you have the Essenes, and you have other groups that we don't have names for. And then you had political groups, and many of these groups were involved politically, but you had groups like the Zealots, who are basically, the patriotic people who decide that they're going to, have their own tea party and to overcome the forces of Rome. So the Kohanim, they're Sadducees, from the Hebrew word Tzedukim, from the name of the Kohen Gadol who was appointed by King Solomon, named Zadok. So their sort of followers are called Tzedukim. And then it mentions the Torah teachers. Who are the Torah teachers? They're also in translations called the scribes. And the scribes are from the Greek word grammateus, which translates literally from the Hebrew word sofer. So we know that, right, those who write Torah scrolls and, holy documents in Judaism is called a sofer, a scribe. And so the Greek grammateus is an exact translation of this term sofer, which is why the literal meaning scribe in English. Hence why it is usually translated that way in most English translations. But the term implies more than simply one who copies scrolls or performs secretarial duties. They are expected to be teachers of the Torah. And the scribes were also associated with the Pharisees, this other, group at the time. And according to Joe Shulam, in Israel, in his commentary, many modern scholars believe that the scribes were sages of the common people. They were likely Torah teachers without smicha, without any kind of formal ordination, and therefore could teach Torah but could not render new legal rulings or introduce new interpretations. According to Joe Shulam, this is why the people were in shock, for example, when Yeshua taught like a rabbi and not like a scribe, right? Because he actually renders halachic decisions. This is why it would then make sense what is said in Matthew chapter 7, verses 28 and 29. When Yeshua had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at the way he taught, for he was not instructing them like their Torah teachers, but as one who had authority himself. Right? I think there's, my personal opinion is there are multiple things going on here. And one of them is the fact that Yeshua speaks with a level of authority that nobody else speaks with, right? For example, in Judaism, if you want to say something authoritatively, how do you say so? How do you say something in an authoritative manner? You cite another rabbi. Rabbi so-and-so says, right? But Yeshua never does this. Yeshua never cites another rabbi or another opinion in order to say something authoritatively. In fact, he just says, I say that this is what it is, right? So I think part of it could be what Joe Shulam is alluding to of like the role of this kind of issue in chapter 7 of Matthew, kind of weighing this authority of the Torah teachers, but I think it's also an issue of Yeshua speaking with authority. Like as God incarnate, like he's speaking in a level of authority that nobody else has. And you see this in other places, which is why the people at times wanted to stone him. But let's get back to our story, our other story, of where will the Messiah be born? When the New Testament or rabbinic literature cites a scriptural passage, it refers to the whole context and not simply quoted words. This is important to keep in mind because remember, when the New Testament is written, that there are no chapter and verse breaks. Those haven't been invented yet. And so they're never just proof texting. And the rabbis do the same thing because they're not working with chapters and verses. And the rabbis are also not even working with vowels. They're just working with the consonants. And so when they cite this passage from Micah, they don't just mean the verse under discussion, they mean the passage. So sometimes when you read a quote from the Hebrew Bible in the New Testament or in rabbinic literature, you often have to go back and say like, what's going on here? Because sometimes the verse doesn't seem to make sense. But then if you go back and look at the entire passage that is under discussion, then it starts to make sense, right? Because they can't tell you, oh, go back to Psalm 1 verse 2, because there are no chapters and verse breaks. So how do they want, when they need to refer to something from the Tanakh, they're just going to cite the passage that kind of is under discussion. But they don't just mean a single verse. People don't think that way yet, okay? It's not until chapter and verse breaks that people can build theologies on a verse, right? Because they somehow view this as standing independently, but you can't do that without the chapter and verse breaks. Everything's more connected. So this is a quote from Micah 5:1, a passage commonly interpreted as a prophecy of where the Messiah will be born, and this interpretation is even found in later rabbinic literature. So it's not only the New Testament that ties this passage that refers to Bethlehem, right? And from you, what does it say? And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means the leader among the rulers of Judea. From you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Like not only did this have an ancient understanding as being the place where David's family comes from, but there would be this idea that in the future, if there will be a restoration of the Davidic line, that restoration of the Davidic line will be through the Messiah. There's a lot we could go here, but we don't have time. So, going on to verse 7, and Herod summoned the Magi to meet with him privately, and he asked them exactly when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem with these instructions. Search carefully for the child, and when you find him, let me know, so that I too may go and worship him. Yeah, right. Right. After they had listened to the king, they went away, and the star which they had seen in the east went in front of them until it came and stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. Upon entering the house, they saw the child with his mother Miriam, and they prostrated themselves and worshipped him. Then they opened their bags and presented him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But they had been warned in a dream not to return to Herod. So they took another route back to their own country. It's amazing that I was thinking about this morning as I'm kind of like preparing for this sermon. I'm kind of like, how did they know, right? If we believe that the text is true, and I do, I just want to say that. So I'm saying that's pretty amazing that they came searching for Yeshua based on their projections of astrological charts. Now, again, by the way, this was a big deal in Judea at the time, even to the point that the most common thing on floors of synagogues at this time, does anybody know? It's the zodiac. When you go to most ancient synagogues from the 1st, 2nd, 3rd centuries, what is on the floor? The whole floor is a huge zodiac, but it's interpreted through the lens of Judaism. And so they'll use the Bible and stuff in order to interpret this. And how did they justify this? They justified it from Genesis. That God put all of these artificial lights in the sky to serve as signs, right? And so they would that's how they justified that it was okay to consult the stars and stuff, because those things were just created things, but they're meant to be signs for what is to come. And also, don't think that Yeshua was only a few days old, because it would have taken quite a while for them to travel all the way from ancient Persia, which is today modern-day Iran. To travel from Iran, they're basically taking Abraham's route, right? Because Abraham was from modern-day Iraq. They're just a little more kind of north. And so they're traveling up through Mesopotamia, up and then down the same route that Abraham would have came into the land of Israel. And then they find where Yeshua is. And this is why, based on when Herod asked them, when did you first see this star, right? When did you guys first started, making this observation and decide to set out? This would give him a window of the age of the child that they're looking for. And remember, he wasn't looking just for an infant. He was like, I'm going to cover the basis, and anyone who fits in this time, in this kind of spread, we're just going to kill them all. By the way, this is kind of remember how everything, one of the things Matthew is doing is showing that, again, there's two major themes in Matthew. One is that this Yeshua is the son of David that we've been expecting. He is the Messiah. But it's also, he is the prophet who's greater than Moses. And so just as there are parallels with Moses and Yeshua, Matthew is emphasizing these things. So, right, the same, again, I believe it happened, but Matthew is emphasizing it to make the connection between Moses and Yeshua. Just as Moses was a type of redeemer, and they tried to kill all the infants in his time, in the same way Yeshua, as a similar kind of redeeming figure who has come to save the people, also there was an attempt to wipe out all the children at his time, right? And we're going to see this pattern over and over and over again between Israel and Moses and Yeshua. And again, this is where Yeshua as one man Israel, the embodiment of Israel, plays into this. Now, I know this is a lot, and I know there's a lot of technical stuff here, but there's so much here that we don't even have time to go into. But, for the sake of time, I got to wrap this up, okay? So they bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Okay, who cares, right? What is this stuff? Well, first of all, these were valuable items, especially gold, right? But frankincense and myrrh, that these were valuable items which were standard gifts to honor a king or a deity in the ancient world. So if you wanted to, bring offerings to a deity or to a king, these are exactly the kinds of gifts that you would bring. And this is part of, again, all these things added up together to threaten Herod. So within this passage from our Chaye Yeshua reading cycle, at the beginning of chapter 2, we encounter two very stark responses to the birth of Yeshua. You have Herod's response, which was filled with jealousy. And we know later he tried to kill all of the Jewish boys in the vicinity. Versus the response of the Magi, who are not even Jewish. They're not even from Judea. And they traveled a great distance, all the way from Persia, from modern-day Iran, and brought precious gifts. And for us, we need to think about this. What is our response to Yeshua and his call upon our lives? Are we avoidant? Or are we rebellious? Or humble and eager to pursue him at great cost? We could be like Herod, and we could be threatened by the presence of Yeshua. Or we could be like the Magi, who are willing to go whatever distance it's going to take in order to find answers. Think about that. They weren't just looking for what's on the other end of the star. They were looking for answers. There was something that told them that something amazing has just happened, and we have to go figure out who it is. I want to challenge all of us, myself included, to have the passion of the Magi. That in order to find our answers in Yeshua, that we will do whatever it takes. And we will offer whatever it costs in order to have that encounter with our Messiah. It's easy when we look back and think about maybe the zeal that we had when we first became believers. But maybe it's time to get that zeal back. That God, would you renew our hearts, our minds, our souls to the relationship that we once had with you. This is even what we pray as a people. When we put the Torah away, we say, what we say, like, renew our days as in days of old. Chadesh yamenu kekedem. Like, renew our days as in days of old. Help us get back to that time that we intimately walked with you. And God, may that be our prayer as well. Renew our days as in days of old, not just as a people, but as individuals. As we're going to continue reading through this upcoming gospel, this gospel of Matthew in upcoming weeks, God, that I pray that the Messiah would become more alive to each and every one of us. That there would be something about his message in this reading through cycle that sticks out to us, that really speaks to us, that moves us to be your people who are called by your name, to be your hands, your feet, your eyes, your ears, to do the works of the kingdom, to prepare the world for Messiah's return. May we be pursuers of peace. And we pray all of this in the name of Yeshua. Amen.